Tov. Today's daf yomi is Bava Kamma daf Pei Zayin Bava Kamma 87. We're going to start with the Mishnah on 87a. The Mishnah says, around halfway down the page, the Mishnah says, Zeh chomer ba'adam mi b'shor. An ox, in many ways, in some ways, is more stringent than a man. Zeh chomer ba'adam mi b'shor. How so? Sha'adam meshalim nezek tsar ripoy shevas uboshes, because a man will pay damages. In addition to damages, he'll pay pain, medical, lost wages, and humiliation. Umishalim dmei vladus, and he'll also pay. A person will also have to pay dmei vladus. Rashi tells us what that is. That if the man, Rahman al will hit a woman and cause her to miscarry, he'll have to pay for the fetus. V'shor eino mishalim ela nezek. An ox only pays damages. Upater mi dmei vladus, and the ox is exempt from the dmei vladus. Rashi says the reason is k'da amar b'shor shenagach hasapar, like we learned earlier in 42a, anashim v'lo shvarim, that only men have to pay that. It's exeris hakosiv, but not oxen. Hamakes avaves imo v'lo asa behen chabura. Let's say a person strikes the father and mother, but does not make a wound upon them. So if he would strike his father and mother and make a wound, he'd be liable for death penalty. But in this case, he strikes them, he doesn't make the wound. Or somebody who strikes somebody else on Yom Kippur, in which case the punishment is not death, but lashes. So in all these cases, chayav b'kuon. He's going to be responsible, since he doesn't get the death penalty. He's responsible for nezek, tzar, ripoy, shevas, and boshes. Achovo be'eved ivri, if somebody wounds a Hebrew slave, chayav b'kuon, he's going to be responsible for all of these penalties. Chutz min hasheves, but he does not pay for the lost wages, because that's his Hebrew slave, and so therefore it's his wages. Bizman shu shalo, that's when the Hebrew slave is indentured to him. Achovo be'eved Kanani, but if a person strikes a Canaanite slave, so under these circumstances, if the Canaanite slave is shel acherim, if it belongs to others, chayav b'kuon, he has to pay for all of these damages because he is responsible to the person. But Rabbi Huda says, "En lavadim boshes," he doesn't pay humiliation because the slave is not humiliated. Cheresh shota v'katan p'giyas ra'ah. When it comes to the cheresh, the shota, and the katan, when it comes to the deaf mute, the insane, and the minor, p'giyas ra'ah. Then we're going to say under those circumstances, the interactions with them is not favorable to the other person. Why? Because achovo b'an chayav, because one who wounds them is going to be responsible. V'heim shechavu ba'acherem, but if they wound others, then we're going to say they are peturin, they are exempt. So if you wound them, you're responsible. If they wound you, then they are exempt. Rashi explains, because they don't have what to pay you. A slave and a woman, a slave and a woman, the interaction with them is also bad, because one who wounds them is responsible. But if they wound other people, they're going to be exempt. But nevertheless, they're going to have to pay afterwards. And Rashi explains. And first we'll read the next line of the Mishnah. If the woman becomes divorced or the slave is freed, then chayavim l'shalim, and they have to pay. Rashi explains, because they are mitchilaim chayavim. They were responsible to pay initially, but rather they had no money to pay, because the nichsei malug, the assets, which are the assets that the woman brings into the husband, which the husband has the right to the dividends, there's a lien on them to the husband, and so therefore the woman cannot pay the person she wounds with them. We're in the last line of the Mishnah. V'achovo b'chavera b'Shabbos, patur mikohen. One who strikes their father and mother, Rachmana litzlan, makes a wound on them, or somebody who wounds his friend on Shabbos is going to be exempt from all of the lashes, from death, and also from one who strikes their father or mother and makes a wound on them, or one who strikes his friend on Shabbos, is going to be exempt from paying the 5 penalties, from all of them. The reason is because he's punished with death. And so we have a principle, kimle b'deramine. Once we give him the more severe penalty of death, he doesn't have any monetary penalty. One who strikes his Canaanite slave is going to be exempt from any damages because it's his slave, and so therefore he doesn't pay the damages. So now we're up to the Gemara on the bottom line of 87a. Ba'imine Rabbi Elazar mi Rav. So Rabbi Elazar asked the question from Rav. Hachovel bebas ketana shalachirim. One who strikes the minor daughter of somebody else, Chavo, who gets the payment for the wound? Now Rashi explains, if it would be an adult, for sure it would be hers, but in this case, she's a minor. So who gets the money? Mi amrinon, do we say, keeping the aknile rachmana shevach neurim wa'aviv? Do we say that since while she's a nara, the money goes to her father, that if she was working while she's a minor, the money goes to the father. That also, if it's a wound, the money should go to her father. Rashi explains, because at about a nara, a girl between the age of 12 and 12 and a half, it says, B'nurea be'savia, kol shevach nurea la'avia, afil kasef kiddushin shelo. That even if she gets betrothed, that money goes to the father. So would we say under these circumstances, the wound goes to the father? My taima, what's the reasoning? Because she's depreciated, and now he's going to get less kiddushin money for her. Or maybe he just gets her money while she's a nara to aknile rachmana, because the Torah says the reason why he gets money for betrothing her is because he can marry her off to whoever he wants. He can give her to whoever he wants. So therefore, he gets the Kedushin money. So do we say Shevach Nura? Huda Aknile Rachmana Dibayel Mimsar Lelu Mukashlim Matzi Maser Avo Chavo about a wound. Kibin Dibayim Mischabopa Lo Matzi Chavel Lo Kanyule Rachmana. But since he's not allowed to wound her, and so therefore, if he wounds her, the Torah says he's not allowed to. So maybe he doesn't collect that money. And how do we know that a person's not allowed to wound somebody else? What's the source for this? So the source for this, says Rashi, is on the top of 87b, is the Ein Adam Rishai L'Chovel Bito. A person is not allowed to wound his daughter, Yisraelisi, because she's a Yisraelis. Va'avra lo Yosif pen Yosif. The Torah says about giving lashes to a person, you're not allowed to give additional lashes if you're a court. So that's the person who's wicked. So we see from here that the Torah is telling us you're not allowed to give a wound to somebody else. So this was the question that Rebbe Lazar asked Rav, and Rav answers on the top of 87b. Amarei lo zochta haTorah la'av, ela shevach nurim bilvad. The Torah is only allowing the father to get the money for her kedushin, but not the money for her wound. So that's what Rav answers to Rebbe Lazar. Our challenges Rav's position that the father does not get the money for her wound. We learned that if it says in our Mishnah, one who wounds a Hebrew slave is responsible for all of these 5 penalties, except for the lost wages, with the exception of the lost wages at the time when the Hebrew slave is working for the master. So how is this a question? Rashi says, "Minasheves bezman she'eved shelo, v'lo be'eved de'acher," but not if the slave belonged to somebody else. The no saying shifto l'rabo. The implication is he'd have to give the lost wages to the master. Katani mias, but we learn from our Mishnah, the Eved Ivri Shalo, that if it's his Hebrew slave, Potter, he's exempt from having to give him the lost wages. Whole Masi Adav Shalo, since he is entitled to his work product. So too in this case, Hachinami Kivan Debito Masi Adav Shalo, since the father is entitled at that stage to the daughter's work product, Lishkol Shevas Didah, he's entitled to her last wages. Mikashel Rav Damar Wazichta Torah La'av Ela Shevach Nurim Bavad Devade Afilu Chavos Zichtula. He's entitled to her the lost wages. So it's not just this Shevach, not just the work product, not just the Kedushin money. It's also the lost wages, and so therefore he's entitled to her wound money. So this is a question on Rav, because Rav says just Shevach Neurim. So I'm Rabbi Moda Rav b'Shevas Demaise Yadeha Adchas Bagros Davuahavi. So Abai says no. Rav would admit b'Sheves. Rav would admit that the lost wages you would give to the father Demaise Yadeha, because work of her hands Adchas Bagros Davuahavi, because her wages until she becomes an adult belongs to the father. So even though Rav says he's not entitled to the money of the wounds, he is entitled to her lost wages. That's the exception. Gemara brings another question. We learned one who strikes his adult son, yitain lo miyad, he has to give him the money immediately. But bivno katan, if he strikes his minor son, yaselo segula, he should make a trust and give it to the trust. Chovo bebito ketana pater. If he strikes his minor daughter, he's exempt. If others strike her, they have to give to her father. We see from here that if she's wounded, you do have to give the money to the father. Gemara says, Hachinami b'sheves. So this is also only referring to the lost wages. So it's not a question on Rav. The Gemara then goes on. It says, Ubenoa gadol yitain lo miyad. So the Gemara challenges the statement. If it's his adult son, you have to give it to him immediately. But we have a contradictory source that states that if one strikes the sons and the daughters of others, if one strikes other people's sons or daughters, then he should give them the money immediately. But if they're minors, he should make a trust. And if it's his own son and daughter, he's exempt. So our first source said that for his own son, he has to pay him immediately. But this source says that for his own son and daughter, he's exempt. So the Gemara says, lo kasha, it's not difficulty. It depends whether or not the sons and the daughters are dependent on your table. If they're eating from your table, you don't pay them. But if they're not eating from your table, you have to pay them. So the Gemara says, so b'mayu kim telekamaisa. So the initial source which says you have to pay them, what's that referring to? B'she'ein smuchan al shulchano, where they're not eating from your table, therefore you have to pay them. Ihachi ema seifa, but the next clause that says, hachovo b'bitu akatana pater, one who strikes his daughter is going to be exempt. V'lo od el acherim shechavu ba chayavam litain lavia, and not only that, but others that strike her have to give to her father. That the bayim mizone, they should have to give the money to her, because since she's not dependent on her father's table, so therefore they should have to give her the mizonos. So she's entitled to her own mizonos if her father's not supporting her. And even according to the one who says that a person can say to the slave, "Work for me, and I will not support you," meaning to say the father's entitled to the mizonos, even though he's not being supporting the Canaanite. Hani mili be'eve Kanani. That's only by a Canaanite slave. Right? Because you could say to a Canaanite slave, "Work for me the whole day," or "Orta zil sachor," and at night go around them begging. Ve'echol and eat. Avo eved ivri, but by a Hebrew slave, d'chsiv kitovo imach b'machol imam ashte. Whoa! But by a Hebrew slave, you can't say that, because it says he has to eat with you and drink with you. It means you have to treat him fairly. You have to give him support if you're going to take his salary. Kol shekain bito. So for sure, his daughter, he can't act that way with her. So if he's not supporting her, she should be getting the the money from the wound. So why does it say that he collects the money and he doesn't have to pay her the money if she's wounded? So the Gemara explains. Gemara explains. Like Rava Braid Rav Ua said in a different context, this is referring to the hadafa, meaning to say the extra money over there mizonos. So this is referring to the extra money over the mizonos, meaning to say the daughter's entitled to her salary, but the extra money beyond the salary, that goes back to the father. So once she gets what she needs for support, the extra money would go to the father. So the Gemara says, "B'mayu kim to ubasraisa." And what did you say is the final case? Bismuchan al shulchano. The final case where it says that he doesn't have to pay them. That's where they're relying on his table. They're eating from him. If that's the case, gedolim yitain lahem miyad, ketanam yasa lahem segula. If that's the case, why does it say the adults he gives to them immediately, and the minors he makes a trust? But if they're relying on his table, amai la'avim ba'ila misvei. You should give it to the father. They're relying on the father's. They're relying on. They're eating off the father's table. So if that's the case, Rashi says, "Lavu ba'im mislevei." T'ma'ishna kichavo behu iu demiftar misheves. Why should it matter if he strikes him himself that he's exempt from lost wages? If other people strike him, they should also give him the money because they're relying on his table. So the Gemara explains, Amri kika kapid b'midei dekachaser b'midei de'aseh ma'alma lo kapid. Gemara says, when does the father care? When he's going to lose the money. If it's his money, he's going to say, where he is about to lose the money, he's going to say, well, you're relying upon me, I'm not going to give you. But if other people are giving the money, he's not going to be exacting about it. Look at Rashi. Where he's going to lose money, where he wounds them. The name away that he could say to them, the name where he could say that we could say to him, go and pay. So therefore, he's only going to care where other people are paying, he's not going to care where he pays. He's only going to care where he pays, but not where other people pay. But the middle case where it says in Shnaim Ochsin, by a lost object, we learned in Shnaim Ochsin that if a person, son or daughter, find the lost object, then they belong to the father. And we established that case is referring to that an adult who's relying on his father's table. And so therefore, by a Metzia, we say he gets to keep it by a lost object. So V'Metzia Demi Almikasalu, and still the kakapit, by the lost object, where even though it's coming in general, he gets to keep it. And where we say the father gets to keep it, even though it's not coming from him, and we still say he gets to keep it. So the Gemara says, Amri Ravacha de Kaasule me Alma Vlesu Tsara the Gufayo Begave Kapit. Says, yeah, if he's going to come, if he's making money from the rest of the world, and the son is not feeling any pain in his body, then the father's going to want the money. But by a wound, this Tsara de Gufayo, where the son has pain, and it's coming from people in general, well, kapit. The father is not going to demand the money. Gemara says, but in that case over there, where he is having pain in general, and it's coming from other people, and he does care, dikatani v'lo od, and because it states not only that, it says that if other people wound him, they have to give it to the father. Gemara says no. Amri hasam de gavra kaptanahu. So the Gemara says, no, that case over there is where he's a gavra, he's a man who's kaptana, who is very exacting. Because there they're not relying on a stable. So therefore, even something that comes from the rest of the world, he's going to be careful. He's going to be say, "I want my rights." But hacha delav gaver kaptanahu. But here he's not that type of person. Das smuchen al shulchano. And so, because they're relying on a stable, so where is he careful? Where does he want the money? Only where he's going to lose the money. But midi asal me'alma lo kapit. But if it's coming from the rest of the people, and if he's not that type of person, he's not going to care. So the Gemara says, "My segula." What does it mean that it says if it's a minor son or daughter, you put into trust for them? So Rav Chisda says that a segula here is a sefer Torah. Rav Chisda says a segula here refers to you write for them a Torah scroll. Rav Bar Huna says dikwa da'achal minei tamra. So basically, why a Torah scroll? Because the Torah scroll is something that you can use, and yet it retains its value as it goes older. So when the son becomes of age, it will still have its full value. Rav Huna says a palm tree that you could eat the dates. So and so too, Reish Lakish said the Torah only gets the shevach nurim, meaning but not the money for being wounded. Rabbi Yochanan says afilu pitzia, even a wound. Pitzia sakadaitach, you get the money even for pitzia is a wound that doesn't draw blood. Pitzia sakadaitach, afilu Rabbi Lazar coming by ela chabola. Rabbi Elazar only asked about a wound, the ifchata mikaspa, that caused her to lose her value. Avopatzia, but a wound that doesn't cause blood, although ifchata mikaspa doesn't lower her value, will come by way. Even Rabbi Elazar didn't ask about that on top of 88a. Amar Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, shepatza b'fanea ve'afchata mikaspa. No, the pitzia here is talking about a case where you wounded her on the face and thereby did indeed lower her value. So I'd like to, for a few minutes,